smash and crumble. In this tutorial I want to have a look on how we can achieve an effect like this. So a fairly simple simulation where I used the assets from the shading and displacement tutorial, and this statue is being hit by this golden cannonball which does its damage, and after that part of the statue crumbles down. So I wanted to do this tutorial to briefly go over events, break events and animation events, just to make sure that everybody understands how they work. In a later tutorial I will make a more advanced example with much more assets in it. But for this one I just want to make sure that everybody understands the basics, and then we will make things a little bit more complicated. So what we're going to cover today, I'm going to create a proof of concept scene, a very basic scene, before we use the production assets to explain the event flow. So basically the destruction flow, how we will set this simulation up. It will be with an initial break, because obviously we have to have a break that happens based on the collision between the ball and the statue. And then we will create a crumble, the crumbling of the fragments or of the statue, with an activate in volume event. And after that we will do the same thing but in the actual shot. So what I have here is the proof of concept scene, nothing more than a cube and a ball. So I will just very quickly set this up as a fracture sim. So I'm going to break the cube. I'm going to create a simulator. I'm going to take both rigid bodies, I'm going to take the simulator, and I'm going to connect them to the simulator. Then I will bring up the fracture UI and we will start setting up the event stack to create the simulation. So as you remember from a few seconds ago, what needs to happen is the ball needs to hit this structure, and it needs to destroy or impact only the top part of that structure, and then a few frames or seconds later the rest of this structure will collapse. So the first thing, if we play this now, nothing happens because we only have the default event set up. So the first thing that we need to do is we could animate this ball, but I'm just gonna give it an initial velocity so it crashes into the structure here. So what we need is minus x, like this, and that should okay, there we go. So voila, that's that. But that's obviously, I mean, it shows us that the simulation is working, but it's not what we want. By the way, if you're getting weird results, that is because Fracture is not compatible yet. We're working on it. With viewport 2 you have to set it to the legacy viewport. So there's that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go, what we need to do is we're going to make the cube passive by ticking off the active tick box here. So and then we're going to set up the events to activate only this top part. So I'm going to delete the default event for now, just to show you. Then I'm going to create a collision event because we want the sim to we want the structure here, the cube, to break based on a collision. So I'm going to use a break fragment event preset, and if you will see now, nothing happens because obviously this cube is still set to passive. So what we need to do now is we need to use an assign modifier. So I'm going to go to assign modifier, and then the attribute that we need to use is obviously activate. I'm going to set it to 1. As you will see now, it works, but like I said, what we want is we only want this top part where the ball hits to become active. So how do we do that? We create a volume filter, and we take the volume volume, I'm going to turn it into a sphere. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, maybe 2.5, and move it up. There you go. And then run the sim again, and you will see that it only breaks where inside this activation volume. So that's the first part of our sim. And what we want to happen after that is that after, let's say, all these fragments fall on the floor, the rest of this tower crumbles. So to do that, we're going to create not a break event, but an animation event, a non-breaking event. And we have a preset here, which is activate in volume. One thing that I want to show is the fracture count here, as you see, is 0. So what I always do is turn on the numeric display, and I'm going to use fracture display. You see this 0 here in the center. Now if I play, you will see that all fragments now have a fracture count of 1. Only these ones here at the top got activated, but the entire structure got fractured. So they now have a fracture count of 1. So this preset that I'm going to use is quite clever, and if I go activate in volume, you'll see that the fracture count is automatically set to 1. So what I'm going to do now is, here we have our volume filter. It's represented by this cube here. So just to make it, just to differentiate them, I'm going to turn it into a cylinder, make it a bit smaller, make it a bit less high. I'm going to take this one and move it up. Now I want this to start, let's make it a bit like that. I want this to start obviously under the fragments that are being activated by the previous event, and I want this to be animated. So let's say, let's play this quite fast. There we go. Let's say at frame 30, I want the second event to start being active. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a time filter to it, set it to frame 30. But that is only part of the solution, sorry. So now you will see at frame 30 the fragments inside this cylindrical volume start activating. But obviously I want this cylinder to move down, so all the other fragments activate as well in a consequential way. So to do that, you select the activation volume, the volume filter here. You make the window active and you hit the up arrow just to select the transform. And then I'm going to use my middle mouse button so I don't have to sim, go to frame 30, set a key with Shift W, and then let's say go to frame 65, move it down, and set another key. I'm just going to give myself about 100 frames. There we go. Now I'm going to rewind. Then you will see at frame 30 it starts activating and the rest comes down. So that's basically the setup that we want. That is the destruction flow. Now it's quite brittle here, so as you know, you could add to the second event, you could for example add a little bit of springs just to keep it together. But if we play it now, it's going to spring everything together and it might be a little bit jello-ish. Okay, so you know, just messing around here, let me just turn off the numeric display and let's put a chance filter on here and have only 50% of the fragments be sprung, and let's reduce the stiffness, or maybe increase it just so we can see a little bit more to 1000. Let's play again. And you will see now that 50% stick together and 50% not. So that's the proof of concept. As you see, it works beautifully. And what I would like to show you now is basically a recapitulation of what we just did. I made a little flowchart here. So the first thing that we did is was the smash with a break event. So we created a break event that broke the geometry based on the collision of the two rigid bodies, the ball and the cube. And after that, we created a activation modifier, or an assign modifier with the activate attribute inside, and we created a volume filter, so the break event here only activated within that volume. The crumble after that, the fragments or the structure crumbling down, is an animated event. It's an animated event because we don't need to break anymore. We don't need to use a break event because it's already broken. And what we used there was an animation event, the animate, using an activation volume, which we animated from top to bottom, and that activated the fragments inside that activation volume. So the idea here again is to set up a proof of concept scene with very basic geometry, so you can lay out your destruction flow. And what we will do now is we will apply that same technology, that same destruction flow, with a little bit of tweaks on the actual production assets. Et voila, welcome to the production scene. So what I have here is I have the statue from a few tutorials already, and I've already set up the simulation. So if I hit play now, you can see that we just have two rigid bodies colliding with each other. Nothing is breaking just yet. Just some notes. Like I said, I kind of set it up already, just a basic. What I like to do is in the globals, I like to lower these settings while I'm playing around with the sim to make sure that everything is working correctly. So I lower the num steps and I lower the fixed time step, which I will increase afterwards again, of course, when I do the final sim. And also here, my num points are quite low because I just want to set it up first to make sure that everything is working. And then after that I will increase this to 1500 or 2000. So, just like in the proof of concept, let's start with a collision event, in this case the break fragment one. Let's add the assign modifier. Let's make this one the activate parameter. There we go. Set this to 1. And as you know, if you would play this now, obviously the whole thing would fracture. By the way, one thing that I will do, just not to waste everybody's time, is when I'm simming or creating takes, I will just fast forward the video in editing. But as you can see now, everything gets activated based on the collision. So all that remains is we create a volume filter. In this case, I'm going to create a sphere. I'm going to select it and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And what I want here is I want the front part of the statue to fracture. So the ball is going to impact around here, and I don't want the ball to go through the statue. I just want this part which is inside the sphere to break off and kind of fall to the floor. The ball will bounce off, and then that's it for that first event. So, well, that's it, as you know. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new take. I'm going to call it initial break. As soon as the UI updates, there we go. Voila. I gotta make sure that I'm in the right one. Okay, cool. Again, if you get like weird stuff happening, it probably has to do that because you are in viewport 2, which fracture does not support. Now it's just disappearing because I have the initial break selected and I haven't written it to disk yet. So I'm gonna do it now. Hit bake to disk, and I will see you on the other side. So obviously something went wrong. What went wrong? I think I forgot to set my statue to passive, exactly. So I have to tick off the active tick box, and let's do it again. So as you see now, we're having a little bit of an unnatural effect. So that's of course an easy fix. I'm just gonna go into the volume filter and move that forward just a tiny bit and maybe down a little bit, and let's do another take. Okay, as you saw, the ball is getting stuck. This is well, look kind of cool, but it's also the sim settings. I will change those later when I increase the resolution of the sim. But this part of the sim is kind of working. So the next part is I am going to create the activate in volume event. As you know, an animation volume, a non-breaking animation volume. I'm going to create it. There we go. I'm going to select it. I'm going to turn it into a sphere as well. Let's make it a little bit smaller. But what I want, unlike in the proof of concept scene, I just want the head and part of the torso to crumble down after the ball has impacted the statue. So how am I going to do that? I'm just going to scale this volume. I can move it or I could scale it. I'm going to animate the scale of this activation volume. So I'm just going to place it here, and at about frame 30, I'm going to scale it. I'm going to keyframe the radius here. So at frame 30, I set a key, and then at frame 50, let's say, I set another key to make sure that everything is in there, maybe a little bit less. Make sure that the head is inside there. Okay, so did I set a key? There we go. So now I'm going to create another take. I'm going to call this one animate in volume. There we go. And I will see you on the other side. So as you can see, that worked as expected. So now I'm going to increase my frame rate. I'm going to increase my settings back to their default 60. And I'm also going to increase my num points to about 10 times as much, so we have more fragments and it looks much cooler. So there's that. And I'm going to create another take. I'm going to call this one 1500 for the num points, and I will bake it. Okay, so that worked beautifully. That did what it was supposed to do. Now that's kind of like the end of the tutorial, but just in case you haven't watched the shading and displacement tutorial, as you can see here, obviously we have very smooth fragments. We have in Fracture obviously a solution for that, just to give yourself much more realistic fragments. I have it already set up here, but it's obviously interior face displacement. So if I turn this on now, I've already connected everything up, so I really highly advise you to watch this shading and displacement tutorial, which uses the exact same asset. But if I hit the update fragments now, you will see that a rock texture, I think, will be applied to the interior faces of the fragments, and you will see immediately that it looks much more realistic as soon as I turn on my polygons, of course. That's by the way another thing that I like doing. I like turning off the polygons so I can just see the fracture mesh, because that really allows me to see the pass colors, so you can see whether your event has passed, if all the conditions in the event have satisfied, so you can really see if everything is working correctly. But anyway, I'll just fast forward a little bit while this is loading, and then you can immediately see the radical difference that the interior face displacement does. So there we go. I mean, it's a little bit too much, so I'm gonna reduce this quite a bit, and I'm gonna increase the detail. Increase the detail actually reduces the detail, so I'm gonna set this one to 6, and I'll just let this calculate. I'll let it do the displacement so my fragments don't look like little porcupines. So there we go. That looks much better. And if I now actually hide the simulator, you can see that we have beautiful displacement inside, and it looks obviously much better than just those very smooth fragments. So there we go. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this clarifies another 2 events. This is just the beginning, of course. This is a very simple simulation. But there you go. Thank you very much.